The crystalline halls of Station Meridian glittered under artificial starlight as representatives from 47 species took their seats in the Grand Assembly Chamber. This was supposed to be an ordinary session, the kind that happened every cycle when the Galactic Council gathered to discuss trade routes and mining rights, and the countless small matters that kept interstellar civilization running smoothly. High Arbiter Hal of the adjusted his ceremonial robes and prepared to call the meeting to order, his silver scales catching the light as he moved. Commander Lisa sat in the human section near the back of the chamber, her balanced on her knee as she reviewed the day's agenda. She had served as Earth's senior representative on this station for 6 years now, long enough to know that most of these sessions were exercises in bureaucratic tedium. The real work happened in private meetings and quiet negotiations, not in these grand public displays. She was already planning her afternoon schedule when the delegation rose from their seats. Ambassador was an imposing figure even by galactic standards. There were beings, standing nearly 3 meters tall with segmented bodies covered in dark chitinous armor. Their compound eyes could see in spectrums that most species could not comprehend, and their mandibles clicked constantly as they processed information. Moved to the central speaking platform with the mechanical precision that characterized his kind. The chamber fell quiet. They rarely spoke at public sessions, preferring to conduct their business through private channels. When they did address the assembly, it was usually to announce some major policy decision that affected the entire galactic community. Lisa set down her and focused her attention on the alien ambassador. His mandibles clicked rapidly for several seconds before his translator device rendered his words in the standard galactic tongue. The Empire, he announced, had formally declared war on the human collective. All human vessels were ordered to leave space immediately. Any human ship found within territory after the standard cycle would be destroyed without warning. The Empire considered humanity an existential threat and would take all necessary measures to neutralize that threat. For a moment, Lisa was certain she had misheard. Her translator must have malfunctioned. There was no other explanation for what she had just witnessed. She looked around the chamber and saw the same confusion reflected on dozens of alien faces. The ambassador, a small furry creature named, actually let out a nervous chirp of laughter before catching herself. High Arbiter Hal rose slowly from his seat. His species was known throughout the galaxy for their unshakable composure, but even he seemed rattled. He asked Ambassador to clarify his statement, suggesting perhaps something had been lost in translation. His compound eyes shifted to regard the Arbiter directly. There was no error, he confirmed. The Empire had declared war on humanity. The decision was final and would not be reconsidered. Lisa's hands were trembling as she activated her emergency communication channel. She needed to reach Earth Command immediately. She needed to warn them. But even as she began sending the priority alert, her mind was racing through everything she knew about the current situation between humanity and the. There was nothing, absolutely nothing. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for barely 20 years. In that time, they had established trade agreements with several species, including a modest arrangement with the for certain rare minerals found in human territory. The relationship had never been warm, but it had been functional. There had been no disputes, no conflicts, no incidents of any kind. The Empire was one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in known space. Their territory spanned 3 star systems, and their fleet numbered over 2,000 warships. They had not engaged in open warfare for centuries because they simply had no need to. No one challenged them. No one was foolish enough to provoke them. And now they were declaring war on humanity, a species with 73 military vessels and 17 colony worlds spread across a single star system. Hal demanded an explanation. The Galactic Council had protocols for conflict resolution, he reminded the ambassador. Wars of aggression without justification were forbidden under the charter that all member species had signed. host's response was chilling in its simplicity. Humanity's continued existence, he stated, represented an unacceptable threat to interests. No further justification was required or would be provided. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives were shouting questions, demanding clarification, calling for emergency votes. The delegation was already contacting there. They were huddled together, their fur bristling with agitation. Even the normally stoic were exchanging concerned glances. Lisa pushed through the crowd toward the central platform. She needed answers. She needed to understand what was happening. But when she reached the delegation, Ambassador simply turned his massive head to regard her with those unreadable compound eyes. "The declaration stands," he said. "Humanity has been warned." Then he walked away, his security detail forming a wall between him and anyone who might try to follow. Lisa stood alone in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the noise and confusion of 47 species trying to make sense of the impossible. Her communication device was buzzing with incoming messages from Earth, from the human embassy, from allied delegations offering sympathy and concern. She ignored all of it. 20 years. Humanity had spent 20 years building relationships, establishing trust, proving themselves worthy of membership in the galactic community. They had followed every protocol, honored every agreement, respected every custom. They had done everything right. And now, without warning or explanation, one of the most powerful empires in known space had decided to wipe them out. The ambassador approached her cautiously, her small paws wringing together in distress. Had been one of humanity's first friends in the galactic community, fascinated by these strange, short-lived creatures who had accomplished so much in such little time. She asked Lisa if there was anything her people could do to help. Lisa looked at the small alien and felt the weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders. Somewhere out there, human families were going about their daily lives, completely unaware that the universe had just turned against them. Children were playing in colony parks. Scientists were conducting research. Farmers were tending crops, all of them counting on people like Lisa to keep them safe. She thanked for her concern and asked if they could arrange a private meeting with as many sympathetic delegations as possible. She did not know why they had declared war, but she was going to find out, and she was going to find a way to stop it. Because surrender was not an option, not for humanity, not ever. She walked out of the chamber with her head held high, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed her. She had work to do. The human embassy on Station Meridian had never been designed for a crisis of this magnitude. It was a modest facility, just a dozen rooms carved into one of the station's outer rings, staffed by a small team of diplomats and support personnel. Within hours of the declaration, it had become the most crowded place on the station. Lisa stood at the center of the main conference room, surrounded by holographic displays showing fleet positions, colony populations, and communication channels that were all blinking with urgent messages. Her staff moved around her in controlled chaos, answering calls and coordinating with Earth Command, and trying to make sense of a situation that made no sense at all. Her assistant, a young officer named Daniel, pushed through the crowd to reach her side. He was carrying a stack of data tablets and looked like he had not slept in days, even though the declaration had only come hours ago. He told Lisa that he had managed to compile a complete record of every interaction between humanity and the going back to first contact. Lisa took the tablets and began scanning through the information: trade agreements, diplomatic exchanges, cultural programs, scientific collaborations, page after page of normal, unremarkable relations between two species who had no reason to be enemies. She found nothing. A commotion at the embassy entrance drew her attention. Security officers were escorting a woman through the crowd, a gray-haired figure in formal diplomatic attire, who moved with the confident efficiency of someone who had spent decades navigating political crises. Counselor Myra had arrived from Earth aboard a fast courier, making the journey in record time. Myra wasted no time on pleasantries. She took one look at the chaos in the embassy and immediately began issuing orders. Staff members scattered to carry out her instructions. Within minutes, the room had transformed from a scene of panic into something resembling a functional command center. She pulled Lisa aside and asked for a full briefing. Lisa told her everything she knew, which was not much. The declaration had come without warning. The refused to negotiate. No one in the galactic community understood what was happening. Myra listened carefully, her sharp eyes studying the holographic displays as Lisa spoke. When the briefing was finished, she asked a simple question. What had changed? Lisa did not understand. Myra explained her thinking. They were not an emotional species. They did not act on impulse or make decisions based on fear or anger. Every action they took was calculated, planned, analyzed from every possible angle. If they had declared war on humanity, there had to be a reason. Something had changed in their calculation. Something had tipped the balance. Daniel interrupted them with new information. He had been reviewing the communication logs from the past month and had found something unusual. 3 weeks ago, a science vessel had entered human space without prior notification. It had spent 4 days conducting scans of several colony worlds before departing. When Earth authorities questioned them about the unauthorized survey, they had claimed it was routine research and provided no further explanation. Lisa remembered the incident. It had seemed strange at the time, but they had been cooperative and there had been no apparent harm done. She had filed a report and moved on to other matters. Myra stared at the data on Daniel's tablet for a long moment. Whatever they found during those scans, she said quietly, it scared them. It scared them badly enough to start a war they cannot possibly win cleanly. Lisa felt a chill run through her. She asked what could possibly be on their colony worlds that would frighten them. They were a species that had conquered star systems. They had faced down threats that humanity could barely imagine. What could they have possibly seen in a handful of young human settlements? Myra shook her head. She did not know, but she intended to find out. The next several days passed in a blur of frantic diplomacy. Lisa met with every delegation willing to speak with her, pleading humanity's case and searching for any information that might explain the decision. The responses were sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful. They expressed grave concern about the situation, but reminded Lisa that the Galactic Council could not interfere in another species' sovereign decisions. They offered to facilitate peace talks if they agreed, but they were not talking to anyone. They offered to serve as mediators, using their long friendship with both species to bridge the gap. Ambassador personally delivered the offer to the embassy and was turned away without a response. The Confederacy, humanity's largest trading partner and closest ally in the galactic community, provided the most sobering assessment. Their ambassador met privately with Lisa and Myra and spoke with painful honesty. They could not protect humanity from the fleet. No one could. He suggested, gently, that Earth begin evacuation procedures for the most vulnerable colonies. Lisa refused to accept that. There had to be another option. There had to be something they were missing. Myra spent her nights in the embassy archives, reviewing decades of galactic history. She was looking for patterns, precedents, anything that might help them understand the mindset. She found records of other wars, other conflicts, other moments when powerful species had turned against weaker ones. The outcomes were rarely favorable for the weaker party. But she also found something else. She found stories of survival, species that had faced extinction and found ways to endure, civilizations that had been conquered and eventually reclaimed their freedom. The galaxy was old and it had seen many things. Daniel brought her coffee one night and asked if she had found anything useful. Myra looked up from her research with tired eyes and admitted that she was still searching. But she told him something that Lisa would remember for the rest of her life. Humanity, Myra said, had always been good at surviving. It was what they did. They adapted. They endured. They found ways to keep going when everyone else had given up. Whatever they had seen on those colony worlds, whatever had frightened them so badly, it was probably that same quality. That stubborn, relentless, impossible human refusal to accept defeat. Daniel asked if that was supposed to make him feel better. Myra smiled grimly. It was not meant to comfort him, she said. It was meant to remind him who they were. Humans did not surrender. They did not give up. They found a way. And somewhere in this mess, there was a way. They just had to find it before the fleet arrived. The Galactic Assembly reconvened on the 7th day after the declaration. The crystalline chamber was packed beyond capacity, with representatives from species that had not attended a session in decades suddenly demanding their seats. News of the war declaration had spread across the galaxy, and everyone wanted to witness what happened next. Lisa took her place in the human section, flanked by Counselor Myra and Daniel. They had spent the past week searching for answers and had found only questions. Now they sat in silence, waiting to see what the council would do. The fleet had already mobilized. 200 warships were moving toward human space in a formation that military analysts described as overwhelming. Earth's defense forces were scrambling to protect civilian populations, but everyone knew the numbers. Humanity had 73 vessels against 200. It was not a fair fight. It was not meant to be. High Arbiter Hal called the session to order and opened the floor to statements. The first speaker was Ambassador, who rose from his seat with the same mechanical precision he had displayed during the original declaration. He confirmed that the fleet was in motion and that the Empire had no intention of negotiating. He urged other species to remain neutral and allow them to handle what he called a necessary correction. Lisa felt anger rising in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. Showing emotion now would only make humanity look weak. The next speaker was unexpected. Ambassador of the rose from her seat and moved to the central platform with an energy that seemed out of place in the somber chamber. The small, furry alien was carrying a data projector, and she asked the Assembly's permission to present some research her people had been conducting. Hal granted her request, though his expression suggested confusion. They were not known for their scientific contributions to the galactic community. They were traders and diplomats, not researchers. Activated her projector, and holographic images filled the air above the central platform. She explained that her people had been studying humanity since first contact, fascinated by these strange creatures who lived such short lives and yet accomplished so much in their brief time. The chamber fell silent as she displayed her findings. Human population growth rates were the first data set. In the 20 years since joining the galactic community, the human population had doubled. This was not unusual for a young species, but the rate of increase was accelerating rather than slowing. Most species experienced a plateau in population growth after achieving interstellar travel. Humanity showed no signs of slowing down. The second data set showed technological advancement. Humans had reverse-engineered faster-than-light travel within 3 years of receiving the basic theoretical framework from the Confederacy. They had established 17 colony worlds in less than 2 decades. Their industrial output had increased by a factor of 12 since first contact. The third data set was the most startling. It showed adaptive capacity, a measure of how quickly a species could respond to new challenges and environments. Humanity scored higher on this metric than any species in recorded galactic history, not by a small margin, by an order of magnitude. Lisa watched the numbers scroll across the display and felt something shift in her understanding. She had always known that humanity was considered unusual by galactic standards. She had not realized just how unusual. An elderly mathematician named Coordinator rose from his seat and asked permission to add to Ambassador's presentation. He was a respected figure in the scientific community, known for his work in predictive modeling. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke, whether from age or emotion Lisa could not tell. He projected his own calculations onto the display. Mathematical formulas and trend lines filled the air, showing projections that extended decades into the future. At current growth rates, he explained, humanity would match industrial capacity within 60 years. Within a century, human economic output would surpass the combined total of every species currently represented in the Galactic Council. The chamber erupted into noise. Representatives were shouting questions, demanding verification, expressing disbelief. Several delegations began rapid consultations with the security officers struggled to maintain order. Lisa sat frozen in her seat. She understood now. She finally understood. They were not attacking humanity because of anything they had done. They were attacking because of what humanity would become. Those scans 3 weeks ago had not discovered weapons or military installations. They had discovered potential. Raw, terrifying, exponential potential. Ambassador rose to speak again. His mandibles clicked rapidly as he addressed the assembly. He did not deny coordinators' calculations. He did not dispute Ambassador's research. Instead, he confirmed it. The Empire, he explained, had recognized humanity's potential decades ago. They had watched and studied and calculated. They had hoped that integration into the galactic community would slow human expansion, that the protocols and traditions of interstellar civilization would temper humanity's relentless growth. They had been wrong. The scans conducted 3 weeks ago had revealed that humanity's rate of advancement was actually increasing. The models showed that within 2 centuries, humans would be the dominant species in the galaxy, not through conquest, but simply through growth, through expansion, through that impossible adaptive capacity that no other species could match. They were not mad, concluded. They were simply acting on the only logical option available to them. They were eliminating a threat before that threat became insurmountable. The chamber fell silent again. Lisa looked around at the assembled representatives and saw understanding dawn on face after alien face. They were not attacking humanity out of hatred or fear of the unknown. They were attacking because they understood mathematics. They saw the future, and in that future, humanity was everything. Myra leaned close to Lisa and whispered a single word, "Now." Lisa did not understand what she meant. Myra's eyes were bright with something that might have been hope. Now, she repeated, "We know what we are fighting, and now we can find a way to win." The transmission from Earth Command arrived during an emergency session of the Galactic Assembly. High Arbiter Hal had called the meeting to discuss possible intervention options, though everyone knew such discussions were largely ceremonial. The Galactic Council had never intervened in a conflict between 2 member species, and no one expected them to start now. Lisa was preparing to address the assembly when Daniel rushed to her side with a communication tablet. Earth had responded to the crisis, he told her. Fleet Admiral wanted to speak directly to the Council. The request was unusual. Military commanders did not typically address diplomatic bodies. But these were unusual circumstances, and High Arbiter Hal agreed to allow the transmission. The holographic display at the center of the chamber flickered, and a human face appeared. Admiral was a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor and intelligent eyes. He was transmitting from the bridge of his flagship, a carrier vessel called the Endurance. Behind him, Lisa could see crew members working at their stations with quiet efficiency. Admiral greeted the assembly with formal courtesy and thanked them for allowing him to speak. His voice was steady, almost conversational, as though he were discussing routine matters rather than the potential extinction of his species. He acknowledged the situation clearly. Humanity could not win a direct military confrontation with the Empire. The mathematics were simple: 200 warships against 73. Superior technology against a species that had only mastered interstellar travel 2 decades ago. There was no scenario in which humanity emerged victorious from a conventional war. The assembly listened in silence. This was not news to anyone. It was simply the first time a human official had stated it so plainly. Admiral continued. He understood why they had declared war. He had reviewed ambassadors' research and coordinators' projections. He did not dispute their accuracy. Humanity was growing faster than any species in galactic history, and that growth would eventually change the balance of power in fundamental ways. But he wanted the Council to understand something about humanity that the numbers did not capture, something that with all their calculations and predictions, had failed to appreciate. Humanity had spent the past 20 years learning. Not just technology, not just science. They had learned strategy. They had studied history. They had analyzed the patterns of how galactic powers rose and fell, how empires expanded and contracted, how conflicts began and ended. They had paid attention. And they had noticed something interesting about the empire. The holographic display changed. Technical schematics appeared, showing a network of structures spread across 3 star systems. Admiral explained that these were automated fuel stations, the backbone of military logistics. Their warships required constant refueling to operate at combat capacity, and these stations provided that fuel. Without them, the fleet could not function more than 6 weeks from their home systems. Lisa felt something shift in the chamber. The assembled representatives were leaning forward now, paying closer attention. Admiral smiled slightly. Human Special Operations teams, he explained, had already infiltrated 4 of those fuel stations. They had done so quietly, without violence, slipping past security systems that had never been designed to handle human ingenuity. They had not destroyed the stations. They had simply introduced a small software modification. If the fleet fired a single weapon at a human target, that modification would activate. The fuel stations would shut down, all of them, simultaneously. The fleet would be stranded in human space, unable to return home, unable to resupply, unable to continue their campaign of extermination. The chamber erupted. Representatives were shouting, demanding clarification, expressing outrage or admiration depending on their perspective. Ambassador's mandibles were clicking so rapidly that his translator could not keep up. High Arbiter Hal was banging his ceremonial staff against the floor, trying to restore order. Admiral waited patiently for the noise to subside. When he could be heard again, he continued. Humanity did not want war. They had never wanted war. Every action they had taken since joining the galactic community had been aimed at peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit. But they had also understood from the very beginning that peace required preparation. He looked directly into the transmission camera, his eyes meeting the gaze of everyone watching. They saw humanity's potential and feared it. That was understandable. Fear of the unknown was natural, but humanity offered a different response to that fear. Instead of destruction, they offered partnership. Instead of elimination, they offered integration. The same adaptive capacity that frightened the could benefit the entire galaxy if it was channeled properly. Ambassador demanded that humanity reveal the locations of their operatives. He demanded that the software modification be removed immediately. He declared that this was an act of war, a violation of every principle the Galactic Council was supposed to uphold. Admiral politely declined. The operatives would remain in position. The modification would remain active. And if the fleet to their own territory without firing a shot, humanity would consider the matter closed. No retaliation. No demands for reparations. Just peace. The choice, he concluded, was entirely in hands. They could attack and lose their entire logistical network. Or they could accept that humanity was not a threat to be eliminated, but a partner to be cultivated. The transmission ended. Lisa looked around the chamber at faces frozen in shock and disbelief. The ambassador had her paws pressed over her mouth. The delegation was engaged in rapid conversation. Even the normally unflappable seemed unsettled. Myra leaned close to Lisa with a satisfied expression. That, she said quietly, is how humans fight wars. Not with overwhelming force, not with superior numbers or advanced technology, but with understanding, with patience, with the willingness to learn their enemy's weaknesses and exploit them without ever firing a shot. Lisa allowed herself a moment of hope. For the first time since this crisis began, she could see a path forward. Not an easy path, not a guaranteed path, but a path nonetheless. Humanity had learned to survive in a galaxy that was older and more powerful than they could have imagined. And now they were teaching that galaxy a lesson in return. The standoff lasted 23 days. Warships hovered at the edge of human space in perfect formation, their weapons powered and ready, their commanders awaiting orders that never came. Human defense forces maintained their positions around the colony worlds, watching and waiting with the patience that had become their defining characteristic. Neither side fired a shot. Neither side blinked. Lisa spent those 3 weeks in constant motion, shuttling between the human embassy and the assembly chamber and the private meeting rooms where the real negotiations were happening. She slept in 4-hour intervals when she could manage it, and survived on coffee and determination when she could not. They were not talking, but everyone else was. The Galactic Council had never seen anything like Admiral's revelation. A young species, barely out of their home system, had infiltrated one of the oldest and most powerful empires in known space. They had done it without violence, without detection, without leaving any trace until they chose to reveal themselves. The implications were staggering. Ambassador came to Lisa one evening with a private message from her government. They had always admired humanity, she explained. They had seen something special in these strange, short-lived creatures from the moment of first contact. But now that admiration had transformed into something else, something closer to awe. If humanity could infiltrate fuel stations, they could infiltrate anything. They could go anywhere, learn anything, adapt to any situation. The same qualities that made them terrifying to them made them invaluable as allies. The government wanted to propose a formal alliance with the human collective, not just trade agreements and cultural exchanges, but a full military and economic partnership. They wanted to tie their future to humanity's future, to grow alongside them instead of being left behind. Lisa thanked her for the offer and promised to convey it to Earth Command, but she asked to wait. Something was happening. She could feel it. High Arbiter Hal called a special session on the 20th day. They had been working behind the scenes, using their considerable diplomatic influence to bridge the gap between humanity and They had finally achieved a breakthrough. The proposal was unprecedented in galactic history. It was not a peace treaty, which would have implied that both sides had been at war. It was not a surrender, which would have required humanity to accept terms dictated by It was something entirely new. A mutual development accord. They had feared humanity's potential. The Council now recognized that potential as an asset rather than a threat. Under the terms of the accord, humanity would share its adaptive techniques with the galactic community. They would open their research facilities to observers from other species. They would explain how they innovated so quickly, how they grew so efficiently, how they accomplished in decades what other civilizations required to achieve. In exchange, the established powers would provide humanity with protection, resources, and partnership. They would help guide human expansion in ways that benefited everyone rather than disrupting existing power structures. They would treat humanity not as a threat to be contained, but as a force to be integrated. It was, in essence, an admission that the galaxy could not stop humanity from growing. The best they could do was grow alongside them. Lisa stood before the assembly to accept the accord on behalf of the human collective. The chamber was packed with representatives from every member species, all of them watching this historic moment with varying degrees of hope and apprehension. She looked tired but determined as she addressed them. Her voice was steady, carrying across the chamber with clarity that surprised even her. Humanity had not won this confrontation through military might, she explained. They had won because they understood something fundamental about conflict. Fear came from uncertainty. Uncertainty came from the unknown, and the unknown could be addressed through transparency. Earth would open its doors to the galactic community. They would share their methods, their thinking, their dreams for the future. They would demonstrate that their potential was not a weapon to be feared, but a gift to be shared. But they would expect the same openness in return. The days of powerful empires making unilateral decisions about the fate of younger species were over. The galaxy would move forward together, or it would not move forward at all. She paused and looked directly at the delegation. Humanity forgave them. They understood the fear that had driven the Empire to such desperate measures. They did not seek punishment or revenge. They sought only the chance to prove that their existence could benefit everyone, including those who had tried to destroy them. Ambassador rose slowly from his seat. His compound eyes studied Lisa for a long moment, his mandibles clicking in what she had learned to recognize as contemplation. Then he moved toward her, his massive form crossing the chamber floor with deliberate steps. He stopped in front of her and spoke without his translator, forcing Lisa to wait for the device to render his words. He admitted, had acted hastily. They had seen projections and predictions and had allowed those numbers to override their judgment. They had forgotten that the future was not fixed, that potential could be shaped by choices rather than feared into conflict. He extended one segmented limb in an approximation of the human greeting gesture. It was awkward and uncertain, a powerful being trying to adapt to unfamiliar customs. Lisa took his limb in her hand and held it firmly. This was a beginning, she told him, not an ending. They would learn from each other. They would grow together. And someday, the galaxy would look back on this moment as the day everything changed. The chamber erupted into applause and calls of approval. Representatives from dozens of species rose to their feet, celebrating a peace that no one had thought possible just weeks ago. They were openly weeping with joy. Even the stoic allowed themselves small gestures of satisfaction. Outside the station's viewports, human and vessels drifted in parallel formation. Weapons were powered down. Crews were watching each other through observation ports, curiosity replacing hostility, wonder replacing fear. Counselor Myra found Lisa in the crowd and pulled her into a brief embrace. They had done it, she whispered. Against all odds, against all logic, they had found a way. Lisa nodded, but her eyes were on the stars beyond the viewport. The galaxy stretched out before them, vast and ancient and full of possibilities. Humanity had taken their first real step into that galaxy today, not as conquerors or threats, but as partners. It was, she thought, exactly what humanity had always been meant to do. Not to dominate, not to destroy, but to grow alongside others, lifting everyone as they rose. She allowed herself a smile. The future was uncertain. It always had been. But for the first time, that uncertainty felt like hope rather than fear. And hope, she had learned, was the most human thing of all.